back in the car. Actually, I never left. I decided to make more than one video. I don't know if I'll upload these right after another, but I will admit, perhaps to my discredit, that I went and saw the Avengers today. And I guess I'm a nerd, but I'm not like a huge comic book fan. I certainly have never read one. I don't follow them all that closely, and I'd say the majority of the comic book movies that have come out in the last 10 years have been kind of disappointing. There have been a few that have been better than that, but not that I really think this is a valid way to critique a movie, but these Marvel ones, which I didn't realize until a few days ago, have been kind of scripted to all run together. Thor, Captain America, Iron Man. Well, Iron Man I think was made on its own and then retroactively made to fit in. We're all kind of designed, the Hulk, we're all kind of intended to lead up to the Avengers, which is actually a very clever kind of thing for them to do, and it does make it. It is nice to have a movie where you have all these characters, and rather than try and mush all of their backstories into the movie, it's just assume that you have seen entire movies for each of the characters explaining their backstories, which is great, because I've seen movies where they try and put a lot of characters in and they try and give them all a backstory, and the movie can't get over that hump. And this, you basically just get them all there. But like I said, I don't want to talk about this. The thing that really bugs me, and if you're a libertarian, you notice this as well. And I noticed it first in the Thor movie, actually. In the Thor movie, you know, Thor is kind of this brat from more advanced civilization that kind of has a patriarchal, protective impulse over the rest of the universe, or at least some section of the universe. And Thor, in his journey, goes from a spoiled brat and an opulent little whelp into, although one with superpowers, obviously, to someone who wants to protect the Earth. And in the course of the movie, we are introduced to a secret government agency called S.H.I.E.L.D., and they are, you know, tracking this whole Thor phenomenon and the threat that it entails. And they end up not really working together in the movie, but at the end, Thor goes to them and says, "You're here to protect this world, and I'm here to protect it, and so let's work together." And a couple times in the movie, the kind of the agent who is the face of this S.H.I.E.L.D., not Samuel L. Jackson, who's in the later films, but in this one, says, "We're the good guys." And as a libertarian, even when I saw Thor, even though that was kind of a subplot in the background, that just leaves a terrible taste in my mouth. And sad to say, in the Avengers, that archetype is of a benevolent yet hyper effective, hyper dedicated, hyper technical state bureaucracy is just there. And this is something that's in a lot of Hollywood movies, and it has nothing to do with reality. There is no such. This is what, when you get in hypothetical arguments about anarchism and statism, this is a theoretical, hypothetical state that people will talk about, but one that has never existed. And it's a state that can do things that everyone else can't do, that's basically that has superhuman abilities. And the people in S.H.I.E.L.D. have superhuman abilities, and I'm not talking about the so-called superheroes. Their agents just routinely are doing things that no normal human could ever do. And not only that, they are perfectly ethical, basically. They never do anything wrong. They're altruistic. They're self-sacrificing to an extreme. And I'm not talking as an objectivist, because I'm not an objectivist. It's just they're not corrupt. They don't fear for their own lives. They don't fear for their own families. They not only are they hyper protective of people in the United States, but generally of all people everywhere. And they value life, and they would never sacrifice it. And again, they're always on the ball. They're always looking for threats. And these threats are never from their own people. They're never thinking, what possible evil could come from, within the United States, like militias or left anarchist groups or whatever, the Black Panthers. No, they're always looking for actual threats, and these are threats that, as they're depicted in the movies, are overwhelming and could never be stopped by anybody but this unique government agency. And it's not like Hollywood always and only ever portrays the government this way. There are many other portrayals in Hollywood of government as being much more sinister, much more bureaucratic, much more inept, even evil. And of course, those are much more interesting movies because they're infinitely more realistic. I understand there's a certain kind of, this is a shortcut. You want to have a protagonist, and you want to maybe have a protagonistic institution, and so what else are you going to do? I mean, it would kind of be hard to say, let's have a vast secret society of well-meaning protectors. You'd have to kind of invent that. People tend to think of the state as at least nominally providing this service, and so let's just go with that. And so they do. But it's utterly... I mean, they're not bureaucracies. They're usually headed by not some politically minded bureaucrat who's out to advance their own career, which is the case at least 95% of the time, but it's usually by some very colorful, strangely unaccountable Ubermensch. In this movie, S.H.I.E.L.D. is headed by Samuel Jackson, who walks around in a leather trench coat and an eye patch, and he doesn't like the bad guys because the bad guys are mean, and he's nice, and he's going to do all the right things, and everything he does is motivated out of goodness, and he's not answerable. Like in the movie a couple times, his higher-ups have discussions with him, and he basically blows them off when they tell him to do something he thinks is wrong. He just says, I'm not doing that. And he has like 100% control over all these resources. And in the Avengers movie, there's this completely outlandish, as if there weren't, I mean, it goes without saying, it's the Avengers. Like, most of the main plot elements are completely outlandish, but they... At one point they land on this aircraft carrier, which immediately you can tell is about double the size of any normal, like, Nimitz class aircraft carrier. It's a huge ship. And then it turns out that it's actually 2 or 3 times bigger than it looks, and it's actually not just an aircraft carrier that floats on the sea. It can fly. It has giant radial engines on the side. Very, very oddly reminiscent of the ones in Avatar, except the ones in Avatar were actually somewhat plausible, where this was not somewhat plausible, because you see the movie and you'll tell, not only can they fly and have a full complement of ships and everything, and like giant laboratories and space age technology. I was actually surprised that they were prop driven and that they didn't have like anti-gravity, jetpacks or something. But they didn't, so I think that's a nod to Avatar. But not only that, but it's invisible. Like, it has invisible paneling that makes it look invisible. And it can apparently fly forever, even when it takes... Well, this is the other odd thing. It gets shot by a single arrow with maybe an ounce of explosive on it. And that single arrow, it causes this huge explosion. It destroys one of the 4 props that holds up the airship, but the airship doesn't crash, and then Iron Man and Captain America are able to fix it. I'm not laughing at the outlandishness because, okay, it's a movie, but the idea that the government has this super effective weaponry, and this is how people kind of look at military spending. The thing is, we do waste a ton of money on weapons, and they are kind of impressive to look at sometimes, but they're not effective. It's not clear what they're even supposed to do. I mean, the Navy this is especially obvious with the Navy. The Navy has a problem because there's nothing out there for them to fight. this global war on terrorism, they don't have battleships and aircraft carriers and submarines. And no other nation, very few nations have navies that are even mentionable in comparison. And the ones that do, they're only mentionable in comparison in the line of they're 10 times smaller. Watch out. I think the biggest navy after the U.S. in terms of number of ships and how much that costs is the UK, the British Navy, the Royal Navy. And if I'm not mistaken, a single aircraft carrier in the U.S. fleet costs a third of the entire UK budget. And there's not, I don't think there's 10. I think there's 8 aircraft carriers in the U.S. Navy. And I mean, like the Nimitz class, the 1,000-foot nuclear-powered, $110 billion monstrosities. And what exactly do they do? They're just big white elephants, and the Navy has to kind of come out and they have to advertise the service that they get. That's how bad their image is. I see their commercials now. It's a global force for good. It's a huge, enormous waste of money, and those ships, contrary to what's shown in Marvel Universe, is that they can be sunk by a single $20 million missile, and more than that, they're just not very effective. They can't travel around the world at an instant and all that sort of stuff. So S.H.I.E.L.D. is like the quintessential statist myth made manifest in fiction. Which, okay, it's fiction, so it's allowed to do that. So I'm not going to say it's a bad movie because of that. It's just very, very annoying. And we don't see it all the time, in Hollywood especially, because a lot of times the state is depicted as malicious or incompetent or both, which is accurate. But here we have, it's hyper-competent, it's hyper-motivated, it's super, I mean, it can do things that no one else can do. And it's the only thing protecting us, and that's the other line. Hobbes said, if we didn't have the state, and he meant a absolute monarchy, but okay, let's just transpose that to a state generally, that life would be nasty, brutish, and short. And in this movie, if we didn't have a state, we'd all be dead. Aliens would take over. And obviously, if aliens tried to take over, the government would be able to stop them, right? I don't know if this movie's... I mean, it's actually a fun movie. I don't know if this is more a mockery of the movie, because, what do you expect? It's a superhero movie. It's not, like... It's not supposed to be that serious, I guess. But... I don't know. Yeah, it's... What I don't like about it, though, is then people imagine that this is what their government is. They don't think about what their government actually is, or how it actually behaves, or how it ever has. They just imagine it like S.H.I.E.L.D. as this benevolent, omnipotent, I mean, it's not actually depicted as omnipotent, but powerful enough to defend us all. And of course, motorcycle. It's like in TV, the police are always depicted as saving the day and solving the crime and doing the right thing. There's very little moral ambiguity. And the state is in the right, pretty much always. And anybody who knows anything about the legal system knows that's just utter bullshit. That's just not how it is. Does that happen? Yes. But when that does happen, it's almost always due to the fact of non-state entities basically gaming the system. A good defense attorney or a good defendant who's able to defend themselves effectively with or without the help of counsel. And occasionally, the good prosecutor or the good cop. It's not very common, but it can happen, I guess. But most people, when they talk about a state, when they argue for or against it, they couch it in the terms of the white knight state, the hero state, the ethically unimpingible, technically wondrous, omniscient, altruistic state. You know, if you ever watch Law and Order, the prosecuting attorneys are never thinking, I want to get elected next month, so I'm just going to throw away this innocent guy in prison. That happens all the time. It's a fact. It's a fact. When they get elected, prosecuting attorneys are politicians. They're not legal jurists. But most people haven't, unfortunately, been, you know, well, not unfortunately, people haven't been chastised by the system enough, and so their view of it isn't based on analyzing its history or how it actually is. It's based on, unfortunately, Law and Order and cops and CSI Miami and CSI and Hawaii Five-0 and the Avengers. And that's a totally unrealistic foundation to have an understanding of reality. And it's not bad to put something in fiction, you know. Fiction is fiction. But, I don't know. I do actually think, and I don't think it's just libertarians, the stuff that presents the state more realistically is much more compelling. Because then it has a greater grounding in reality. And again, it's not like that's rare. I mean, there's plenty of indications of totalitarian or dystopian states. I mean, I just did a review on the Hunger Games. The dystopian police state is something that Hollywood does a lot, much more than television, by the way. And that's good too. But when I watched the Avengers today, I just couldn't get out of my mind how asinine, you know, the whole thing was. And then there's a little bit, like at one point it's revealed that S.H.I.E.L.D. is developing weapons, but the reason they're developing weapons is to defend the Earth. It's not because they want to use them against their own people. But we know, look at what the FBI does. Someone called me as I was on the way to work. And they said, did you hear the FBI caught some anarchists? By which I assumed instantly they meant anarcho-syndicalists. Anarchists who wanted to blow up a bridge. The FBI caught them. They were going to blow up the bridge. The FBI stopped them. And as soon as I heard that, my mind said, I wouldn't be surprised if the FBI gave them the explosives and talked them into it and then just busted them. And sure enough, within that same conversation, as the rest of the story was related to me, that is exactly what happened. Now, am I a genius? Do I have psychic powers? Did my iPhone alert me to this before? No. I don't have an iPhone, my smartphone. No, it's just that this is what the FBI does all the time. I think since 9/11, they've had about maybe 45 about terrorist cases, and all but 2 of them were 100% provocateur. And I'm not saying Alex Jones told me. I'm saying the FBI announced in the news the same day they made the arrest or within the next couple days. They have to do that because it's going to come out in trial anyway. And none of these events would have ever happened at all, in all likelihood, if the FBI hadn't made that happen. So they're not out looking to stop Loki and the Asgardian army or whoever. They're not developing technology to fucking stop their enemies that might hurt American people. They're using all their surveillance and all of their evil powers and their ill-gotten gains to hurt us, to attack us. They see us as their enemy more than some foreign foe. The foreign foes are actually useful to them, and that's something that we all know. They like that when there isn't a foreign foe, they invent one, or they take one that's pretty minor and they hop them up to be something more major so that they can make a big deal about it. Like Islamic terrorism. Islamic terrorism is real, but it's probably literally 1,000 times less important than the government likes to make out, because that's their new enemy. And they like to overblow their enemies because then they can scare us into how much they're needed. Like we need them for any of this. So sometimes I wish my libertarianism wouldn't spoil a movie. It didn't spoil my movie experience. I don't want to sound too cantankerous. It's just really annoying to to just see this. Everything we know about bureaucracy says that an organization like S.H.I.E.L.D. can't exist, even if in the mind of some government bureaucrat they wanted it to. It just can't. And that's just forgetting all the technical things that they're incapable of producing. You know, and it's not like these movies are totally like that, because if you look, Iron Man, a lot of people thought Iron Man had a lot of libertarian leanings in it because it's about a private entrepreneur. The other thing that they'll do is if they don't have the state be the protagonist, they will have some arch billionaire be the protagonist. The biggest examples obviously are Batman and Tony Stark. And in that case, you almost have to have them be entrepreneurs. Although in the new Batman movies, his family was kind of depicted as being mega, well, not mega, fairly altruistic and public-spirited in the sense of building a public transit system, but whatever, he's still a billionaire. But anyway, Avengers is definitely not a libertarian movie. But it's still fun, so if you want to go see it. And Chris Hemsworth, wow. And the guy who played Captain America, whew. Just wish he wasn't such a nationalist. Otherwise.